Naomi. It's great to be here again talking to everybody in YU. As Naomi said, today we're talking about career opportunities in Israel, and this conversation is directed towards where you're up to as a college student. But if you're not a college student right now and you're joining us, I hope that you will get something meaningful out of this as well. And everybody is welcome to reach out to me after this webinar if you don't have your question asked, or if you want to continue the conversation at employment@nbn.org.il. Now, don't worry about writing down my email address or any of the websites I'm going to talk about. I will send both these slides and all of the links that I mentioned, plus my email address, out in a follow-up email. I will note that throughout the webinar, you're welcome to put any questions that you have. Please put that in the Q&A section, not the chat box. It'll just be easier for us to follow. And let's jump in. All right, so I'll really just start by saying Mazel Tov on taking a first step towards making your Aliyah dreams come true. Just the fact that you're here having this conversation, in my mind, is a real step in the direction of getting towards Israel and figuring out how it's going to work for you. So let's talk about, what are we going to talk about today? I want to cover what planning you should be doing at this point in your career. What does research look like to get to where you want to be in Israel? What does networking mean for you at this stage? We're going to talk about salaries because I know that's something on a lot of your minds. We're going to have a look at a timeline. You know, how do you get from point A to point B, making Aliyah and having a wonderful career in Israel? We are going to touch upon a couple of career topics, things that are probably pretty common YU majors, I'm just guessing. Right, so why are we planning so early? Even if you're far away from making Aliyah, or you don't even know what you want to be when you grow up, you're not sure 100% that you want to be making Aliyah, you're trying to figure out how you can make a good living in Israel. I always tell people that it's easier to make a plan and then change it, rather than, oh my gosh, I really want to make Aliyah, what am I doing, you know, last minute. So if it's something that's on your radar screen and it clearly is something you're at least thinking about because you're here in this webinar, try to start planning things out. What would a career path look like for you to make it work in Israel? What would making Aliyah look like for you and your career path? So I think that it's never early to start thinking about things, start planning, start getting answers to your questions. One of the best ways to get a head start is research, is the amount of information that is out there in this day and age. You know, we live in this technological, amazing wonderland where you can sit in your pajamas on your couch and read the equivalent of the Wall Street Journal in Israel. I'm sure a lot of you are keeping up on current events in general in Israel, but how much are you following business news or developments and trends in different careers or different fields in Israel? So one, now's the time to kind of broaden your horizons in terms of what are you reading, what are you following about what's going on in Israel. Two, I encourage people to use Israel job boards the way developers use Amazon reviews. Now, one time I saw a news article about a group of product developers, and what they would do, and maybe they're still doing this, is they go through all of the product reviews on cameras, tables, vacuum cleaners, and see what people have written about it, what people have complained about or said was great. And based on those reviews, they make a new product. Now, you are not looking for a job today, all right? You're not applying for a job today. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't already be looking at the job boards, because you could look at the job boards as if it's a research tool, just like these developers were using Amazon product reviews as a research tool. You can see what's out there. You can see what skills are in demand. You can see what trends are going on, what fields look like they're increasing with the number of posts that you see, what fields that maybe you thought you wanted to go into, but you just don't see any traction. It's a great research tool to get an understanding of what is the market, what is the job market, what does opportunities look like in Israel. The best way to use the job boards this way is to take 5 or 10 minutes every week, every other week, but on a regular basis and see what's out there. Not like once or twice to get a snapshot. That's not going to give you a full picture of what's going on. While you're using all these tools, and we're going to talk about networking, but while you're gathering your research, start to create a picture in your minds. If I'm a social worker in America versus a social worker in Israel, what are the differences in my job requirements, if any, licensing requirements, if any? What do my options look like? Are they different, if at all? Salary differences, different opportunities that I can work on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Start to research, okay, I want to be a pediatrician. What would that look for me if I stayed in the States? And what would that look like for me if I moved to Israel? Now, another great resource that's out there is the Nefesh B'Nefesh Professions Index on our website. I'll send you the link, don't worry about it. But basically, you can go onto the Nefesh B'Nefesh website and find information about so many careers. A lot of the pages of information that we have up there have interviews with people who work in those careers. So these are usually Olim who have been there, done that, made Aliyah, and want to share their experiences with other people. If there are licensing requirements, it'll talk about that as well. And very often it'll give more in-depth snapshot or resources or links. You want to learn about being an electrical engineer, you want to learn about working in graphic design. There's myriad options and career opportunities. So definitely spend some time on the Nefesh B'Nefesh website. There's a lot of information out there. Networking. Now, it is never, never, never too early to network. I already mentioned that it is too early to apply for jobs. You know, when we talk about what is the timeline for applying for a job in Israel, you should be immediately available to work if you're actually applying for a job. If you're clicking that submit button, if you're sending in your resume, you need to be able to work within a month or two. So if you're a year away from graduating, even if you're finishing with an MBA, and in New York, there are firms recruiting up to a year in advance. That's not a thing in Israel. Do not send your resume in that far in advance. But it is never too early to network. You're at a crossroads maybe, and you're thinking about what direction you want to go in. Maybe I'll major in this, or maybe I'll major in that. Maybe I'll major in marketing, or maybe I'll major in communications. So I would suggest that you find who you would be in 5 years. Find your people, find who you would be a couple of years down the road, and pick their brain. Why did you choose to go into this field? What do opportunities look like? What can I expect to make? Where are the jobs? Definitely be networking as early as possible. If you're not already on LinkedIn, I would encourage you to be on LinkedIn. If you're already on LinkedIn, I would encourage you to be using LinkedIn. Most people are on LinkedIn. Most people take a couple of minutes one afternoon, set up a LinkedIn profile, and then don't really touch it after that. Maybe they're following a couple of companies, maybe they're following a couple of influencers out there, but typically people are on LinkedIn. Once you're stepping up your networking ability, I want you to be using LinkedIn. And that means looking for people in your field or in your possible field and reaching out to them. For example, if you imagine yourself as we'll go back to marketing, the director of marketing, you could put in a search in LinkedIn, director of marketing, and instead of looking for jobs, look for people, and not just anybody, but people who are in Israel. And it'll come up with a list of people you are either directly connected to or second or third connections. And you can reach out to them and say, hey, my name is Allison. I'm a student in YU, and I'm looking to make Aliyah in 3 or 4 years. Tell me about, what your work is entailing right now. Tell me about conferences or podcasts I should know about that are possibly relevant to somebody looking to enter the field. How much Hebrew do I need to? All these different things, pick their brain. Come up with your 3, 4 basic good networking questions. And anytime somebody says, oh, you're studying, graphic design, I have a friend who's working in that. So you already not just make the connection, but you're ready to start the conversation. All right, let's talk about salaries. Let's talk about money. Everybody knows the old joke of how you make a fortune in Israel. You have to bring a bigger fortune with you. But I promise you, I didn't bring any fortune whatsoever of any size with me when I made Aliyah, and we're figuring it out and everything is fine. The answer is maybe you don't need a fortune, all right? Because salary is one slice of your budget. It's an important piece of the puzzle, 100%. You should know your salary expectations. You should understand how your income works. But keep in mind that your salary is a piece of the puzzle. For example, if your salary is 30% less in Israel than what you would make in America, but you plan to have 5 kids and you want to send them all to day school education. In Israel, it's next to free, basically. So even though your salary is a lot less, you're also spending a lot less. Your budget looks different. So I encourage you not to let people say, oh, you'll never make it in Israel. And you'll hear it. People are going to say this to you, your parents, your friends, your grandparents, your relatives, whatever. Don't move to Israel. It's no one moves to Israel because they want to make $1 billion. Like, people move to Israel because they want to move to Israel. And if you want to move to Israel, you will figure out a way to make it. Keep in mind, you're setting real goals. You're not necessarily, most people are not looking to make $1 billion. You might, but you want to live comfortably. You want to be successful. You want to be happy in your career. Figure out what does your lifestyle look like and figure out what your real goals look like in Israel. On our website, I'll send this to you. There are budget tables where you can get an idea of comparing what is your typical single family couple budget look like in Israel. Keep in mind, a lot of people in America don't even understand what their budget looks like. A lot of people in America do not understand where their money is coming and going. And what I'm encouraging you to do as a homework assignment is create a budget. If you stayed in America, this is what your budget would look like. And if you made Aliyah, this is what your budget would approximately look like. Of your research, I want you to think about school. You need to go to graduate school for your profession. That's something else, another added layer that you should look into as you look into your careers, as you explore what your career in Israel looks like. Do you need to go to graduate school at all? Do you need to go to graduate school, which is not necessarily a given? Should you go to graduate school in Israel? Should you go to graduate school in the States? I understand from Naomi that there's going to be another webinar on graduate school in Israel in the future. So I definitely encourage you to tune into that. I will say that there are definitely pros and cons of doing graduate school in Israel. And my 2 cents is make sure it's on the table as an option for you. Whatever you decide, even if you do in the end decide to stay for graduate school in the States before you make Aliyah, but understand what the pros and cons are, understand what the benefits are, and put it on the table, at least for consideration. Hebrew. All right. Can you have a successful career in Israel in some fields without speaking any Hebrew? The answer is yes, but okay. There are many opportunities for people to have great paying jobs, a successful career in English only. But you guys are more towards the beginning of your career than the end of your career, than the sunset years of your career. And my goal for you would be to have as many options open as possible. So even if you know for sure that you can get a job in your field, in Israel, in English, I would still encourage you to work on your Hebrew already now. Something else you can do. That's one thing. The other thing is there are many fields where you have to have Hebrew, whether it's an intermediate level, conversational level, or fluent level. That's something that you and I can continue on an individual basis. Again, I'm happy to continue the conversation. Anybody who wants to talk to me, send me an email. All right, we talked about when you apply for jobs, not until you're actually ready to work in Israel. Like your Aliyah paperwork is in and approved and you're booked on that flight or about to be booked on that flight, then go ahead and apply for jobs. A conversation I have with people at least once a week is I'll find a job and then I'll move to Israel. Or Allison, help me find a job and then I'll put in my Aliyah paperwork. Or I'm not getting on the plane until I have a job in my hands. Again, these are conversations that people might be having with you as well. And the truth is there's logic there. There's a lot of logic to having financial security in your hand before you get on the plane and move to Israel. But the truth is, it is a lot easier to find a job once you're in Israel. A lot of employers, a lot of companies, organizations are just not going to be interested in speaking to you before you have 2 feet on the ground, before they are assured that you're really getting on that plane. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. I have seen many people get job offers before they make Aliyah. But if you are super committed to making Aliyah, then you're going to make Aliyah whether or not you have that job in your hands before you get on the plane. Something that I'll just throw in the back of your minds is the concept of paperwork. Just like we talked about planning at the beginning of the webinar, start to get your regular Aliyah paperwork together and start to get any paperwork that you need for your profession. For example, if you're in a field that requires a license in Israel, if you're a teacher, if you're a nurse, if you're an OT, you're a PT, you're a speech therapist, you need your diplomas, you need your transcripts, you need your license. Here's a hint, by the way, to anybody who's thinking of being pre-med. You need to show your original documents to the Ministry of Health. We just ran a conference called MedX in New Jersey. If you're in a medically licensed field, you're invited to talk to me about it. And I have to tell you that people come to this conference with their heavy framed diplomas to show to the Ministry of Health representatives. People fly in from 20 states to Teaneck, New Jersey to come to this conference. I just got back and they're flying with bubble wrapped diplomas. I'll tell you a secret. I met a nurse practitioner who did high quality scans of her diploma, framed the high quality scans. Nobody can tell the difference. And she has her actual diplomas still in an envelope. And she was able not to schlep all of her heavily framed stuff. Why am I telling you this? Because you guys are still in school. Think before you frame your diplomas. That's all. All right, careers in Israel. What's a good job for Israel and what's not a good job for Israel? So this is a question that people ask me all the time, where people say, I hear I should go into high tech. That's where all the money is. Now, you couldn't pay me enough money in the entire universe to make me want to go work in high tech. Like the money does not exist in the world to pay me to work in high tech because I have no interest in it. So the answer, the question here is not what's a good job in Israel, or what's not a good job for Israel, but what is a good job for you in Israel? Right? You have to start with whether or not I make Aliyah, what am I interested in? And then based on that, what makes sense in Israel? Most fields exist in Israel. Israel is about the size of New Jersey, so there are some fields that are much smaller. For example, the finance industry is much smaller in Israel than it is in the States, but it exists. Big law firms, big, business firms, big accounting firms, do they exist in Israel? 100%, but they exist on a much smaller scale. And then there are fields that are totally not relevant in Israel, like coal mining, okay? Do not become a coal mining engineer if you want to move to Israel. There are some fields out there, they don't exist in Israel because they don't exist in Israel. All right, so make sure you are doing your research. And as I mentioned along the way, try to figure out, what are the differences? What does your work-life balance look like if you stay in the States or if you move to Israel? I'll throw out a couple of examples. For example, medicine. I know from when I went to the doctor in America, you see the secretary and then maybe the med tech or maybe a nurse and then maybe the doctor. And then at the end of your appointment, the doctor takes notes and the notes go to one person for transcription, and the doctor's appointment information goes to somebody else for medical billing. Everything's like all wrapped into one here in Israel. The doctor does a lot more of his or her own secretarial work. Is it a big deal? I don't think it's a big deal, but if I was a doctor, I would want to know what I'm getting into before I step into the role. A lot of people work in social work in the States. Coming to work in social work in Israel is not just, okay, I'm a social worker, so I can be a social worker, but it's learning how the system works. When you went to school, when you go to school to become a social worker, you're not just learning your skill sets, but you're studying case studies and learning how the system works that you're about to work in the United States. Now you're going to Israel and you have to learn the whole new system. Not only that, but also probably Hebrew. So that also circles back to, should you do graduate school in America versus in Israel? But also understanding, what does your potential career look like in Israel versus in the States? I'll mention one more here is the concept of being a rabbi. As you know, the pulpit rabbi model, the community rabbi model, does it exist in Israel? It does to a certain degree, but not really as a career the same way it does in America. Most communities, Jewish communities in America, are built around a shul, built around a synagogue. And in Israel, it's just not quite like that. Will you find exceptions to the rule? Yes. But I'd encourage any of you future rabbis out there to try to think about alternative plans, other ideas, or consider that being a pulpit rabbi in Israel might be your part-time gig, but not your full-time job. All right. On our website, I will email this to you. You should have an understanding of what your earning power is, what your earning potential is. This is a pretty simplified chart. I have about 4 or 5 other more detailed charts that I can send you based on how many years of experience you have and what your job title is. So if this is something that you're interested in looking at already now, send me an email. A couple things to understand. Salaries in Israel are quoted on thousands of shekels per month, and not an annual salary. It took me a while to get used to thinking about it that way, but now that I think about monthly salaries, it honestly makes more sense. Most people do a monthly budget, monthly household budget, rather than an annual budget. So you think about it that perspective, it actually does make more sense. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when you're up to really mapping out your budget, money, issues for you and your family, is that the package looks different in Israel than it does in the States. Maybe your salary is lower, but Maybe you have more vacation days. I know me personally, I had to use all my vacation days in America for the Chagim, and I get Chagim off plus vacation time in Israel. Also, your employer, I'll just throw out a couple of examples, but look into things like this. Your employer is required to pay for your transportation. Now, what that means to one employer might be giving you the bus money. It might be giving you the train money. It might be giving you a car. So look into what does a typical package look like in your field. All right. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A section. I'm very happy to answer questions for a couple of minutes if anybody has, but I'll just take a minute to review. We talked a lot about planning. We talked about research, things that you can already do now at this point in your career, trying to figure out what do your options look like? What are the fields that you're interested in or that you've decided you want to be in? What do they look like in Israel? Comparing, if you know what you want to be, what does that look like for you if you stayed in the States versus Israel? We talked about following the news. You know, I am sure all of you are really good on being up on current events in Israel. Start to look at, you know, business trends, what's going on in different fields, acquisitions, whatever is relevant for you. If you're in medicine, what's going on in medicine? Find where your people are at. Find podcasts, YouTube channels that are based in Israel. You want to take it up a notch, find them in Hebrew. Things that are relevant for you, conferences, start already getting into that world. Okay, let's take a look, see if there are any questions. How do we begin the paperwork process? So basically, if you're planning to make Aliyah in the next year and a half, I would encourage you to open an Aliyah application with Nefesh B'Nefesh. And keep in mind that no one is going to drag you onto the plane. You can open up an Aliyah application and then not make Aliyah for 3 years, not make Aliyah at all. But it's a lot easier to have the option open for you if you've already started the process. And you can go onto our website and see what documents you'll need and start to gather them. If you don't have a birth certificate, you don't have your long form birth certificate, if you're married, a marriage certificate, or your adoption paper, all this stuff, start to gather it because paperwork is annoying and it'll take some time. All right, my email is here and I'll also send it to you in an email follow-up to this webinar, and you're definitely welcome to reach out to me and I'm happy to continue the conversation. Can you get a job in Israel without making Aliyah? Let's say you want to go to Israel for a year to try it out. Can you get a job for that year? So the way to do that is, I'd say, 2 options. One, there are Masa programs. You can Google Masa. And there are internship programs through Masa where they'll place you in X, Y, and Z companies. And it's usually for like 3 months or 6 months or 6 weeks or whatever. And it's through a program. They deal with your housing. They deal with, they take you on trips, all that different stuff. They're really nice options. Other idea of, let's say you want to work in Israel for a year, is to get an A1 visa. If you are eligible to make Aliyah, you're eligible for an A1 visa, which gives you the legal ability to work in Israel. And yes, then you could, let's say, work for a year, try it out, dip your toes into it. Yes, 100%. Only thing to keep in mind is if you come to Israel for a year on an A1 visa, something like that, and then you want to make Aliyah, so your Aliyah rights and benefits might be calculated from the day you arrived in Israel on your A1 rather than when you made Aliyah. It's a complicated issue. It's not a reason not to do it, okay? If you want to try it out for a year and then maybe go back, you're losing or the changes in your Aliyah rights and benefits is not a reason not to do it, but it's a great conversation to have with an Aliyah advisor. You can go onto our website, you can write to Aliyah, ALIYAH, at nbn.org.il. It's on our website. You can find it on Google. Again, there are options out there. Somebody asked a question in the chat. Please follow questions. If you have any other questions in the Q&A, please. Is there already established mentorship program with people with similar backgrounds, majors, goals to meet current students? So if you are thinking of working in communications, or you want to work in, you want to teach, you want to work in architecture, or you're going to work in either architecture or graphic design, send me an email, and I keep a list of about 800 volunteers in dozens of fields that are very happy to speak with you. Now, you cannot send, I don't have the bandwidth if you send me an email with a list of 20 fields that you want mentors in. But definitely, if you send me an email and you have 2, 3, 4 directions that you want, I can generally send you a few contacts in each of those fields. By the way, and I don't see any other questions at this point, but my favorite networking question is always, who else should I be speaking with? So if I can connect you with 2 or 3 people, after you have a little conversation with them, that you have an opportunity to pick their brains, say, who else should I be speaking with? And those 2, 3 people should be able to put you in touch with another 2, 3 people, and that's building your network. I see another question here. I want to work as a nurse practitioner in Israel. Would I have to renew my degree, take extra courses in Israel to be able to work? So the short 90-second answer, and Bella, I encourage you to reach out to me, and we'll continue the conversation. In order to work as a nurse practitioner in Israel, first you need to get your license as an RN, as a regular nurse, recognized. And you need to work in Israel as a nurse for a year. And then you apply for recognition as a nurse practitioner. If you go onto our website, Nefesh B'Nefesh, do a search for nursing, you'll find a full page information about nursing, including licensing. And the last 2 tabs are about nurse practitioners. What does national service look like for someone who makes Aliyah at 22? What are the differences between Army and Shirut? Send me an email, or I think there's an email, there's options online on our website. We have an entire division of Nefesh B'Nefesh devoted to Army service, Shirut Leumi. I will send that email address out in my follow-up email. Is it better to finish all school in America and then move to Israel? For context, I'm going for OT, thank you. So the answer is there's no right answer. I'm going to leave most of that conversation to my colleague Shlomit, who I believe will be giving another webinar in the future, but I'll give you a short answer. There are financial implications. Schooling in Israel is generally cheaper. And that may be a real concern for a lot of you. If you start your career in Israel earlier, it'll be easier for you to transition into how the system works in Israel, how the field works in Israel, Hebrew, getting used to it, etc. On the other hand, you may say, I'm never going to be able to do schooling in a foreign country, even if it's in English. I just need to stay where I'm used to. I figured it out financially. I can't see myself moving until after school, etc. If we were having this conversation before college, my guess is most of you are already in college. There are a couple of degrees that are different. For example, law. Law in America is a master's degree. In order to be a lawyer in Israel, that's a bachelor's degree. So there are certain times that there really is a bigger difference between what is your last degree, last mandatory degree to work in that field look like in America versus Israel. So the answer to Tamar is that it's an individual question whether it's better to do school in America versus Israel, and that there are many factors to consider. All right, last call for questions.
Can you speak a little bit about how you get the A1 visa?
Sure. So that's something that Nefesh B'Nefesh has nothing to do with. We facilitate people who are making Aliyah. I don't want to misspeak because it's not something that I personally deal with, but I believe you'd start by reaching out to the Jewish agency I would say Google it, try to find other people who've done it, but it's not something that Nefesh B'Nefesh deals with. I will say, I'll put a little asterisk that let's say you are on an A1 visa in Israel, and then you choose to make Aliyah, you can make Aliyah from within Israel through Nefesh B'Nefesh, and that's something that we definitely help with all the time. Oh, how much savings is advised for a couple to come to Israel with? So I'll change that question. How much savings is advised for anybody to come to Israel with? I would say that a lot of people choose to do Ulpan when they make Aliyah. Ulpan is a free Hebrew intensive language course. The full-time option is 5 hours a day, 5 days a week for 5 months. There is a part-time option or evening option available as well. But I would basically think about how long do you think it's going to be realistically until you get settled and get a job. Now, there's some people who, even if they quit their job right away, they want to have some time to have a break. Maybe they're with kids. Maybe they want to travel around the country for a while. Maybe they're making Aliyah in August and the Chagim are in a minute and they don't want to deal with looking for a job until later in the year. Some people want to focus on the full-time Ulpan option, and it's very, very, very hard to have more than a part-time job while you're doing that. So the answer has a lot to do with how much is your rental income, approximately, or expected rental income, what are your other expenses look like, and how soon realistically do you see yourself working? And I would try to encourage you to come with at least that cushion for that time. Does the Israeli government give you sal klita? It's an aliyah benefit. I call it monopoly money. It's nice to have money. It is never going to be the difference between somebody making it or not, somebody making aliyah or not. And it's a little bit of a cushion. But in terms of coming with savings, as much as you can would be the easy answer. But to give you a more realistic answer, try to figure out what is that window between when you land and when you're realistically going to be working look like for you. Are you living in Beersheba? Are you living in the heart of Tel Aviv? Are you living in Jerusalem? What does your budget look like? All right. I don't see any other questions. Naomi, do you have any other questions you wanted me
No,
to?
but I've had this from a few students, so I'll ask it on their behalf.
Sure, please.
They're concerned about doing law in Israel if they get their training here, because they know that law is based on the British, I believe, the British system in Israel. So can you say a little bit about people who have successfully made Aliyah as lawyers and who are currently working in some capacity in law in Israel?
Sure. So first of all, we actually ran a webinar not that long ago just on law in Israel. You could probably look it up on the Nefesh B'Nefesh YouTube channel. If you're interested in seeing it, send me an email. I'll say that I find lawyers in Israel, and maybe this is just anecdotally speaking, but I find lawyers in Israel working in a more diverse array of titles, of fields, of positions than I see in America. Especially a lot of people who go into law in America have this idea of what a lawyer is and go in that direction. And I see so many lawyers in Israel working in high tech, working in business, working in law firms, working in nonprofits. So I do feel that there are many opportunities in terms of what you can do as a lawyer. If you are making Aliyah as a young out of school lawyer, like you're within 5 years of taking the bar, I might encourage you to take the Israeli bar. If you've been working as a lawyer for longer, there's something called registering as a foreign lawyer that you can look into. But honestly, a lot of places are hiring lawyers for your knowledge set and for your skills, not necessarily you need to be an Israeli licensed lawyer. Coming back to this international age that we're in, there are contracts, there's just communication, there's business understanding, and there really are quite a lot of opportunities. Lawyers is one of the fields that I have quite a number of contacts in. Anybody who wants to talk to some lawyers in Israel and pick their brains, definitely reach out to me. And the same, of course, goes for many, many other fields.
Great. And the last thing I just want to say, also from a couple of students that I've met with
Sure.
recently, and I know you addressed this, I think, at the MEDEX symposium, but physician assistants.
Yeah. So
can
physician,
you-
yes,
yeah,
so physician assistant is an emerging field in Israel. The short answer is we expect it to be formally ironed out very soon. We've been lobbying very hard on this issue with the Ministry of Health. It is officially recognized in Israel in certain areas, emergency medicine, pathology, and anesthesiology. In reality, most physician assistants are really only working in the emergency room. We're trying to do two things. One, create a formal licensing process like every other medical profession for you to transfer your license. And we're trying to expand the opportunities that physician assistants have. In the meanwhile, there are ways that you can work as a physician assistant. I'd be happy to talk to anyone that's relevant for that. But there's also telemedicine. A lot of people are working either part-time or full-time. And this, by the way, goes for nurses, doctors, people who can get real in-person jobs in Israel, but sometimes it's a nice way for them to keep their fingers in the pot in the States, have some extra money. So there are options. I'll say one more thing, and that's it. Anybody who's in a medical field who wants to pivot, there's also a lot of medical research, medical technology, medical startups, and a lot of those places will look to hire somebody with a background in the medical field. So I meet this a lot of times with people who are a bit older, like maybe in their 50s or 60s, not looking to start a new clinical career here in Israel, but still want to be involved. And a lot of them do go towards the more startup, more high-tech direction. All right.
Yep, thank you.
Oh, I see one more question I don't want to miss. Can you speak more about remote work making an American salary in Israel, lifestyle implications? Is it realistic? So I will say, first of all, the whole concept of an American salary is not what it used to be. Okay. Yes, salaries across the board tend to be lower in Israel, but it's not what it used to be. It's not the giant gap that it used to be. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there's working a remote job, and there's working a remote job that requires you to work American hours. Now, I would always encourage somebody who has a job in their hands, if they're going to be working remotely, to work that job, during the first year or two in Israel transition. That's a great idea. For the long run, I would not encourage you to be working a job that requires you to work American hours forever and ever and ever. If you're single, it really cuts into your social scene hours, the time that you want to go out to coffee shops and go to the movies and go do things, and you're sitting at home working on the computer. And if you have a family, it cuts into family time. It's not a great long-term scenario if you're working in American hours. Now let's talk about if you're working remotely without working American hours. There, I would encourage you to look at two things, and this is also overlapping for the first one, is one, taxes. All right, there are tax implications to working US income, earning a US salary, and living in Israel. Speak to a US CPA in Israel. If you need to talk to some, let me know, and I will give you some ideas of who you can speak with, but there could be tax implications for that. That's the first thing. Second thing is, even if you're not working American hours, it's still pretty isolating. I'm sure many of you have been doing school remotely, working remotely during Corona years. It's pretty isolating. And since one of the goals of making Aliyah is to live here, to integrate, to be here, to have work friends, you know? Again, it's something that could be a good solution, but I'd encourage you to look at factors that are beyond just comparing salaries. All right, I don't see any more questions.
I'm sorry, just one last one.
Yes,
Allison,
please.
I know this is not the purpose of this webinar. But to my understanding, and again, I would be happy to be corrected. Many students want to do internships in Israel, in whatever areas they're interested in. And we know that there are some organized programs, whether it's through MASA or whether it's through Israel Top Internships.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
just different programs. Is it legal to do an internship without going through one of these programs?
The answer is a great question, first of all. And the answer is it needs to be through a program, or you need to be legally eligible to work in Israel, whether you already have Israeli citizenship, you're making Aliyah, or you have an A1 visa. I'll also put a little note that the whole concept of summer internship doesn't exist the same way in Israel that it does in the States. In Israel, what's much more common is something called a student job or a student position. And that goes for either undergraduate or graduate. And it's basically a part-time position that is 1 or 2 or 3 days a week, and it's built around your school schedule. And it's generally related to what you're studying, but it goes on the school calendar year. It's not a summer position. Again, here and there, as you said, Naomi, there are programs, there are organizations. It's not quite the same summer internship concept. And yes, you need to either go through a program or you need to be legally eligible to work in Israel.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so Allison, I just want to thank you so much.
My pleasure. This was great.
And I think you said this, but I just want to reiterate it. So everybody who you have that has attended the webinar will actually get a copy of this.
Yes.
Okay.
I will
great.
I'll send out my slides. I'll send out a link to the recording. I'll send out the links that I mentioned and email addresses that I would send. And I invite anybody who wants to continue the conversation to follow up with me. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Allison. And thank you, Shira, from behind the scenes for helping us coordinate this. And just please, I know Allison is honest when she says anybody wants to follow up with her, she will follow up with you. So It's not just a line, but I've heard back from students who've done it and who have found her very responsive. So please, this is the beginning of the conversation, but the conversation can continue.
For sure. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. להתראות.
להתראות. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.